Responding to the slander. If you watch this live presentation here on Instagram with Charles Mackenzie, President of Infected Blood Australia, you'll hear my response and our group's response to the recent slander against myself and against our campaign. And g'day, you'll also get a message that I'm going to send to the Infected Blood Inquiry in the United Kingdom, which is ongoing. It's the largest inquiry in British history, and it is investigating Britain's deadliest medical scandal, contaminated blood, and I am currently serving of a witness to that inquiry. G'day, thank you to those people who are joining me. Thank you, Sharon. Light Within, what a lovely name. And Stand Up and Speak Your Truth. Oh mate, so happy to see you here. Fantastic. And if you can't stay for the duration, you can watch it on video. Well, what a live presentation this is. I don't think I've given one of this, something like this in 30 years I've been campaigning. I'm a little bit nervous, to be honest, but I'm nervous because it's such a big thing that I'm about to say. Okay, so for those of you that know me, you'll know that I've been campaigning for decades for victims of Australia's deadliest medical scandal, contaminated blood. Victims of similar scandals have been helped all around the world, and in fact I just mentioned the Infected Blood Inquiry in the UK, and that is investigating their scandal, but it needs to be pointed out that British victims of contaminated blood have had access to significant financial assistance, the kind of financial assistance that would save their homes and keep food on the table for 20 years. And yet the same is true of Canadian contaminated blood victims. And yet there's one country that's been left out, and that's Australia. And 20 years ago we had a pathetic Senate committee look into contaminated blood, or the hepatitis C aspect of contaminated blood, and they determined that no financial assistance should be afforded Australians with the bleeding disorder haemophilia. That was a criminal decision. We now know that that was a criminally corrupt decision. Okay, and the denial of help to Australian infected blood victims has hastened deaths. I have lost friends in my group who died without help, and that sort of thing doesn't leave you. Now, as I said, I've been a witness to this Infected Blood Inquiry, and yeah, great to see you. Stand up, speak your truth. Great, mate. I've been a witness to this Infected Blood Inquiry, and my statement has been published. It's a long read, but it's a very important read for Australia, because this is the tip of the iceberg. What I've mentioned was the tip of the iceberg. We were talking about tens of thousands of Australians who are infected and affected by this scandal. Well, in recent days, this man, or a man claiming to be called Jason Brooks, on Facebook, look at that profile. What a horrible, horrible profile picture. Tells you something about him. And straight off the bat, this man contacted us on our Facebook page a few days ago and started swearing, telling us, what the effing hell do you have to do with the UK Infected Blood Inquiry? To which I responded, I am a witness in that inquiry. Immediately following that, this man, Jason Brooks, then started to swear more, and we asked him to stop desisting, to ask him to desist from his swearing. We have a lot of people in our group who have post-traumatic stress disorder, and so we're very keen to lower the tempo of some of the language. We don't want effing this and, you know, really bad expletives, right? The next thing that happened was this man made a series of allegations. Again, this is this man, Jason Brooks. He made them on Facebook. One of them was that I was a cocaine user. No, I am not a cocaine user. I have been called a drug addict all my life because I have had a virus that, like many people in our group who've got HIV and hepatitis C, is sometimes synonymous with drug use, because people who might have shared needles, or it might be synonymous with unprotected sex, etc. Okay? Now, I don't appreciate discrimination against people who use drugs or people who've acquired viruses from other means. Okay? So I have empathy for all people, as does our group, who are infected with HIV or hepatitis C. So this man calling me a cocaine addict is water off a duck's back, but it's untrue and it's defamatory. So the next thing that he did was he then started sharing posts with my picture in. And in this one, this is this Jason Brooks, in this one he says, Charles Mackenzie, do not donate to this fraud. There you go. Right, well, that is slander, and that's actually criminal. You're not allowed to do that. That's outrageous. And he claims to be from the United Kingdom, and Jason Brooks also claims to have lost a mother to the infected blood scandal. And I find that very odd, because he actually also put a message that we shared on our Instagram account and on Facebook, where he asked me, how are you still alive, given the virus that you have? How are you still alive? Okay, well, again, water off duck's back. I'm tougher than that, and I've had much worse than that said. But it's not very nice for victims in our group to have to see such abuse. And I find it deeply suspicious that anyone who claims to have been affected by the infected blood scandal in the United Kingdom would ask me how I still live. And in fact, as we said, this man represents a small contingent, a small minority of British people, if he is in fact British, and if it is true, who have been unkind to our campaign, the campaign for victims of Australia's deadliest medical scandal. But we have great British friends, like heroes, like the top hero among all those infected and affected in the UK is Anthony Ferrugia, or Tony, who's a good bloke, and he has come out recently and shared a message on our Instagram account making it clear that we have his support. And that's great, because the key campaigners of the UK who've worked so hard are the sort of people that we want to have support from. Wonderful, great human beings who understand. No one understands the haemophilia issue and the devastation of what happens to affected families more than Tony Ferrugia. And he knows that what we want here in Australia is for those infected and affected, we want haemophiliacs immediately, without delay, to be given financial assistance so that they can put bread on the table and they can go to their medical appointments and they can keep their families together. They've been denied it for decades. Their families are in desperate trouble. We have haemophiliacs with cancer right now. I know that they'll watch this video. Okay? They need assistance immediately, as do their loved ones, their children and their partners immediately. Children of haemophiliacs must be financially assisted immediately. No more delay. And I know that Tony Ferrugia would absolutely agree. There are infected people by this scandal, and there are affected people by this scandal. Their children, people who've grown up in poverty because a reprehensible health system knowingly delivered contaminated blood to their parents. Okay, and it's been covered up for decades, and Australian families are being asked to do the heavy lifting for something that they didn't cause. Now, this Jason Brooks says, how do you still live? Okay, well, I still have the virus that I was infected with as a child. And as I've shared with people on our social media pages, a lot of tainted blood victims in Australia and in our group don't necessarily enjoy going public. And this is why I'm going to come down like a ton of bricks on people like Jason Brooks. Because you, my friend, do immense damage. Okay? When you make up things about people being drug addicts or drug users, and you lie, and you abuse people, okay, who've got viruses, you do that, and no little wonder why so few people want to come forward. They share their stories. If you go to infectedbloodaustralia.com, you can read submissions that were ignored by the Australian Senate and by everyone else on our infectedbloodaustralia.com webpage. But I stand forward, as I have for decades, and I've been threatened. I've had all manner of things come my way, and I've been told that my life is at risk. Now, I was a witness to this infected blood inquiry in the United Kingdom. And in my evidence that I submitted to that inquiry, I submitted evidence of what was a credible threat to my life, a death threat. Okay, you can read my statement on the front page of infectedbloodaustralia.com, or you can type it into Google, Charles Mackenzie statement, infected blood inquiry. On page 37 of my statement, I will now read you a very worrying threat, or not threat from the individual. It was someone who was actually warning me of a threat, a very good person. Okay, this person in no way was threatening me, they were warning me. And this person was a researcher, a very, very well thought of researcher in Australia, who warned me, and this is how it went. 20 years ago I received this, and I submitted it to the UK Infected Blood Inquiry. the inference of a threat to my life, Charles Mackenzie. Remember something. I was infected as a child. I've been doing this since I was a kid. The campaign was started by children. The boy from my school who was killed by tainted blood, he was 11. He was a haemophilia boy. He had haemophilia. He had some bruising. He went to hospital, was given a blood treatment he didn't even need to survive, and it gave him HIV/AIDS. And he was denied pain relief 4 days before he died in 1989. So when I get threats against my life for something that happened to me as a child, I take it very, very seriously indeed. Make no mistake. And in the days and weeks ahead, people will see what I mean. I'm taking legal action. Now, I will read the threat, and it goes like this. During the course of the Senate inquiry, I had a conversation with the author of Red Alert. I won't mention this person's name. They're a good person. A letter I received from this person, which I interpreted as a warning, insofar as it states, anyone who tried to push on this, use the inquiry to force other data onto the public record, would be risking their life. Because first they would not succeed, and then would be left and exposed as trying to bring to light data that would not get up, and therefore they would identify themselves as a target. Now, the people that were named later on in my statement, if you have a look, the people that were set to take my life and have me murdered were named as the Commonwealth Government of Australia. My own government, our own government here in Australia, wanted to kill me. And in the year 2000, a potential witness to our case down here to help us get justice for the contaminated blood scandal in Australia, a doctor, a British doctor who was the former head of the Queensland Red Cross, was found dead before he could assist in giving evidence into the blood scandal in Australia. And at that time, one of the blood companies implicated, one of Australia's largest companies, $140 billion blood products company, CSL, who were recently mentioned by the British comedian Russell Brand when he was talking about one of America's biggest exports and about how billionaires harvest the blood of the poor. He was talking about Australia's CSL. They've become America's biggest blood products provider. And it is also the case that this company, CSL, have run a decades-long cover-up and attempts to silence me, Charles Mackenzie, and members of our group, and haemophiliac survivors in our group, people that they've infected. CSL knowingly infected Australians, and they've caused countless deaths here in this country. They've murdered people. And they've murdered people in our region. They've exported tainted blood. And to the people involved with the infected blood inquiry, you will know that you had a core participant in your Edinburgh hearings, a Di Thomas Griffiths, a wonderful man, so eloquent. He spoke of a coalition of silence that surrounds this infected blood scandal that went all the way from the UK and came down here or across the Commonwealth into Australia. We took British protocols on blood. They helped to establish our blood service. We took their specialists. But the British authorities lied about the safety of blood and the blood system in 1974. And that led to countless infections and deaths in Australia. It is the truth. It is the truth. British victims are rightly receiving financial assistance, but their relatives have not been. They've been, like Australians, left out in the cold. Relatives of British victims have been left out in the cold, just like their Australian victims or Australian affected people. It needs to be addressed, and the inquiry is looking at that now. There is actually a indication that the British government has accepted liability, and that the children and the relations of infected blood victims will be compensated. Right. So this is a major, major scandal. And I am still currently serving as a witness to this infected blood inquiry. Why am I And why are our social media pages being accused of fraud by a man who claims to have been affected by the scandal? Do you have laws in the United Kingdom, in your country, in England? Is this acceptable to the Infected Blood Inquiry? I'm a serving witness of your inquiry. Do you find that acceptable? Does Sir Brian Langstaff, the chair, find that acceptable, that I should be called a fraud and a cocaine addict? Do you find that acceptable when I'm a serving witness of your inquiry? Do you have laws that protect witnesses against slander? Now, I am going to be speaking with my lawyer, Michael Imperato, who has helped force the Infected Blood Inquiry in the UK, and I'm going to, in the strongest possible terms, ask that this matter be investigated, and I ask for police involvement. Because while I consider it water off a duck's back, it greatly affects our campaign. This man is saying, do not donate to this man. Well, I have actually declined donations, thank you very much. We've actually funded this campaign myself and through the kind volunteers in our group. How dare you? How dare you? If this is your name, Jason Brooks, how dare you? You absolute coward. How dare you call us frauds? How dare you? I don't think I've ever been angrier in 30 years. Now, there's been some unfortunate British people have also inferred that we're anti-vaxxers and that we're about something else than contaminated blood. How dare you? If you read our statement and my statement to the Infected Blood Inquiry, how dare you? Not one part of my statement has anything other than the terrible crimes that have been committed against haemophiliacs in our country. They were knowingly infected. Children were knowingly provided contaminated blood. How dare you? Don't you ever infer that I'm anything other than someone fighting for this cause. How dare you? Now, I thank you for having patience, because I'm very upset about this. I've had threats against my life. Now, when I go around Sydney where I live, there are some very wonderful people that recognise me. They're very kind. But I don't know everybody, and we have thousands and thousands of people that send us messages, and we thank them very much, but we're groups of volunteers and we're disabled. And so when someone approaches me, sometimes I can be slightly apprehensive because I have been told that I'll be murdered. You know, who knows what will happen? Maybe they'll get a meth addict or an ice addict or something, pay him some money and stab me to death. Who knows? I'm very concerned. We've had a potential witness, a British doctor, Dr. Ian Young, die under suspicious circumstances in Australia. And I've mentioned that in my statement. And I've lived in fear, although I've had the Grim Reaper hanging over me my whole life like others in this group because of our infections. But to also be told I'll be killed is a bit much. And now to be called a fraud and a cocaine addict by someone who claims to have been affected by the scandal in the UK. And on our Instagram page, when I mentioned this abuse, another individual wrote on there, and I'm going to see if I can find this. Another individual wrote on there, and let me see if I can find it. Thank you for your patience as I try to find this. And I query this individual as well, and I'm going to mention that the damage that slander can do. Here we are. Okay, so a chap, Lamu Shamasad, but I'm talking about the defamation. He says that. And he says, I've contacted you regarding my mum's infected blood and you have not gotten back to me. Why is that? Well, we've looked. We can see no contact from you, Lamos Halasad. And we have had tens of thousands of people infected and affected by this scandal in Australia. It's Australia's deadliest medical scandal and its biggest cover-up. I am disabled. And in fact, just recently, I have been having MRI scans on my brain. I've had 3. And I've had every manner of test. And that is because I have been losing function in my body, losing full use of my bladder, my legs and my arms. And I've also lost some fine motor control in my hands. My speech is affected and other things. It was a private issue and I wanted to keep it private, but I mentioned it to the group and I've had to go public because I fully believe that probably I'm going to have to retire from this campaign. But I do not want the campaign for Australians to retire, and I don't want it to end. I thought that perhaps I had dementia, that the virus had replicated in my brain, and I thought perhaps that would be the way that would go out. And I've seen it happen to other members of our group, so I was fully prepared. However, after having the scans, it's been found actually that my brain is clear. So while I may be in desperate trouble and I might die, hopefully I'm going to keep my personality. Unfortunately, I've been found to have a really bad problem with my neck. My neck is degenerated, it's broken basically, and it is impeding my nerve function. The nerve is being blocked. I use medicinal cannabis when I can. It gives me some control of my muscles, but it's a very expensive business, okay? And I have not asked for donations for it at all. I do not have a general practitioner because I can no longer afford to see one, because no one in my local area, because I have a problem walking and I've had to retire from driving for now, will accept what's called bulk billing in Australia. So I can no longer afford to see a GP within my local area, and I am in desperate trouble medically. I spend all of my pension on feeding myself and paying for myself, and also paying to run this group, Infected Blood Australia. And so when I am defamed and a man writes, like this terrible person, Jason Brooks has written, do not donate to this fraud. Okay, Charles Mackenzie, I take extreme exception, and I will be contacted. I've never contacted the police before. I'm doing so now. I'm also going to use this moment to actually say to the Infected Blood Inquiry, yeah, I'm going to have to say to you, I would like you to do the right thing here. Yeah. Can you get the police to let me know what I can do as a witness in your inquiry? Is there a provision? Because I don't think that's okay. All right? The man knows I'm a witness in the inquiry. He asked what connection I had to the UK. I told him I was a serving witness. And the next thing you know, it's I'm a fraud, a cocaine user, and there's just so much that this man's written. Now, incredibly, we blocked this man. We blocked him, can you believe, on Facebook. And would you believe it, he still gets through the block. We've contacted Facebook, they don't get back to us. So he still gets past the block. So we may be dealing with a professional. Okay, so over the course of 30 years, I've had a lot of threats and a lot of abuse. I've had a sustained campaign by the Australian government to discredit me. I've had a sustained campaign by the government-funded, taxpayer-funded organisations to discredit me. The Hepatitis Australia have defamed me and defamed our group. The Hepatitis Australia ran a campaign against haemophiliacs 20 years ago. Haemophiliacs approached me decades ago because they knew that I was speaking up about blood transfusions and contaminated blood. And haemophiliacs said that no one is going to help them. And they said because the whole system in Australia is covering up its deadliest treatment scandal. They said that the Australian government was involved. They said that one of Australia's biggest companies, jab maker and blood maker CSL, was involved. They said that the government-funded agencies, such as their very own foundation, haemophiliac's very own foundation, the Haemophilia Foundation, of which this man is the president. He's been there for decades. His name is Gavin Finkelstein. Do you think he's once called for an investigation into the deaths of 1,400 Australian haemophiliacs, or the infection of 1,750 haemophiliacs with HIV or Hep C? Do you think just once he has? No. But what he has done last year is he wrote this in response to me bringing out evidence that showed a publication by which blood donors were recruited. It was a sexually explicit publication from 1982 that asked people who were high-risk donors to donate blood. And that blood plasma was used to make treatments for haemophiliacs. This is during the HIV crisis, for goodness sake, in a sexually explicit publication. And what do we get? The head of the Haemophilia Foundation, the president, Gavin Finkelstein, Haemophilia Foundation Australia, comes out and says, he's crazy, and doesn't represent the bleeding disorders community. Well, I'm not crazy, and I have great empathy for people with mental illness. I have had post-traumatic stress disorder, but then so too is everyone in our group, and so too would British campaigners attest to. They would know that what I'm saying is true. My right lung doesn't work, and as a result I have to lean to my left or take cannabis to get my lung to lift. I feel like I'm suffocating and being strangled at the same time every minute of the day, and I may very well die of a stroke, okay? At any moment. It's okay. I hope to live to 99 like my Welsh grandfather. I'm a very healthy man. I don't drink. I don't take drugs. I don't even really take big pharma medications. Did you know that? I'm very careful. Why? Because I've got dragons to slay. I've been fighting them since I was a kid. It's the Australian healthcare system and the medical tyrants. They're the dragon. Okay, whenever anything goes wrong in a big way in our healthcare system, whenever patients are harmed en masse, they cover up and they lie, okay, and they cheat. And that's the truth. And I want my life to be, if I have to be remembered for anything, I want you to remember I love Australia, okay? It's not okay. We get treated the worst of the worst. It's not okay. When I first met a hero of mine, National Living Treasure, I'm going to get a picture of him now if I can find it on my iPad. Thank you for your patience as I look this up. We're doing this live on Instagram. Thank you for joining me. I've chosen to do this live on Instagram so that I don't know how to edit videos anyway very well, but I want you to know that it's very authentic and genuine, and there's no time limit. So thank you for your patience. But I want you to know the full truth, and in this video you're going to hear the full truth. Okay? And 20 years ago, I had the privilege, I think it was more than 20 years ago, of meeting the National Living Treasure to Australia, the Reverend Bill Cruz, who's a great man. And I'll tell you what, if there is a charity out there, even though I decline donations, and Bill never gives me any money or anything like that, no, he's totally independent of us, okay? But if there is anywhere that you want to donate to the Bill Cruz Foundation. Yeah, do that, because I've seen what they do for people, and I know people who've been greatly helped, and infected blood victims are among them. Bill Cruz spoke up for us when it was unfashionable to do so years ago. Now he's very busy, of course, with his main role, which is saving lives. And he has a wonderful restaurant in Ashfield, and it's a beautiful place. It's the Loaves and Fishes restaurant. I know that the advertising guru John Singleton was funded that initially. What a wonderful man. So I went to a meeting with the Reverend Bill Cruz many years ago. Long time ago. There he is. And do you know what the first thing, and he'll remember this, the first thing I said to him was this. I said, Australians are treated differently. Okay? Australians are treated differently. What did I mean by that? I didn't mean that to be an Australian, I mean if you live here, if you're a resident or a citizen, it doesn't matter what religion you are, okay, or what background you have, or what race you are, what ethnicity you are. If you're Australian, you're a resident here, a citizen here, you're Australian, right? But as soon as you're Australian, you're paying tax and all the rest of it, we get treated differently than other people in the first world. Okay, if something goes very, very wrong medically, if we have a medical scandal, and because sometimes medicine harms patients, it can't always be avoided. Okay, there's risk and reward in healthcare. And patients are sick. Not every patient's going to survive. It's not always the health system's fault. Okay, of course not. We're reasonable people. This is a reasonable campaign. What I mean is that when people are injured, they're not helped. Why are we not helping people, for goodness sake, if they've had an adverse event? Why are we not helping them? How could we help them? Healthcare? Give them the healthcare that they need, the acknowledgement, the support. And in the case of haemophiliacs, for goodness sake, we've got people in our group who've got HIV and Hep C from their blood treatments that they didn't even need. Their parents have died in depression because they didn't want that to happen to their children, for goodness sake. Or their children live in depression because they didn't want that to happen to their parents. Where is the help? Where is it? Victims of the infected blood scandal were helped in Canada. They were helped in the USA. They were helped in Europe. They were helped in Ireland. They've been helped in the UK. Except for their loved ones. That needs to change now. But in Australia, nothing! No help at all! Not one drop! Not one! And I've watched mates of mine die because of that. I've even had some victims get angry at me, which I understand, because we haven't got anywhere. Okay? G'day, Phil Paul Pete, thank you. And I'm making this video to say to the people that are accusing me of fraud, you're wrong. You're wrong. And it's slander. And I'm going to be taking police action today and action with my lawyers. You better believe it, because I represent victims of this group. It's a hard thing to do because, you know, we get death threats, we get abuse and all sorts of stuff. But we're going to keep telling the truth. Children were knowingly harmed. I'm a former child patient. I was harmed in the 1980s by contaminated blood. I then bumped into a major scandal. I found out that a boy at my school, who has a name protected in the courts of H, was murdered. Murdered by the Australian government, by the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and by the blood products and jab maker CSL. He was murdered. And I also found government documents where they infer and they speak of the fact that they're going to make an example of him because he wanted help. His parents needed help. AIDS was a scary diagnosis in the 1980s. They needed any help. They were having to pay for their own medical costs, and the Australian government and the Australian Red Cross and Lifeblood denied this young little boy of 11 years of age, dying of AIDS, help. His parents went to court. My H died during that court case, and his parents failed. The court case failed. They found against him because the court case did not have all the evidence. We have that evidence now. His blood had been recruited from people that they were taking blood from people who were infected with viruses such as hepatitis B. They were using infectious blood donors' blood. They were collecting blood from people that they knew to be high-risk donors because they were also collecting blood at the same time in the 1980s during the HIV scare to develop a hepatitis B vaccine. They were blood-based back then. So they were two-timing the blood supply. 1 minute they're collecting blood to make blood transfusions and make blood products, but at the same time from that same blood they're making a hepatitis B vaccine with the American pharmaceutical giant Merck. This didn't happen anywhere else in the world, but it happened here in Australia. And one of the companies involved, CSL, is now worth $140 billion. If this truth had come out, they wouldn't be worth 1 cent. And this is why I get the death threats. And this is why every time I go out, I have to look over my shoulder because people recognise me and come up to me sometimes. And just lately, I've had one guy who about 4 times has looked to deliberately run his bicycle into me. Okay? And swears abuse at me. I don't even know this guy. And these things have started to happen. And so now, on social media, we have this horrible man calling me a fraud, calling me a cocaine user, asking why it is I'm still alive given the illnesses that I have. What is the infected blood inquiry in the United Kingdom that I'm a witness of going to do about this? What are British authorities going to do about this? What are British police going to do about this? Do you have laws? Are you going to enact your laws? Do you allow this in your country? We don't allow this here in Australia. I'm asking that you do something now. Okay, in the interest of decency, for goodness sake. How dare you, Jason Brooks, if that is your name, you terrible man. And these are the pictures. He's probably used somebody else's pictures. But these are the pictures of this man who asked why it is I'm still alive. And look at that terrible profile picture. Doesn't that tell you something about this awful individual? Asking why I'm alive, calling me a fraud, telling people not to donate to me, even though we decline donations. Why do? Because we knew that CSL and the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood and the government were going to come for me. Oh, yes, we did. I've told everyone. You ask Tony Farrugia and the other British campaigners, I've let them know what we're dealing with. They know. The UK, the real people who care about blood in the UK and across the world, they know. They know. So, apparently I'm to be murdered. And that's in my evidence to the UK infected blood inquiry. And it mentioned in my statement who the people who are going to murder me are. The Commonwealth Government of Australia. You're in so much trouble. Anything happens to me, the world knows, to the Government of Australia. Australians are the finest people in the world. They're my people and I love them. I'll tell you that much right now. Australians have spirit. We've been badly let down by the corrupt government that we have today. It needs an overhaul. Desperately needs an overhaul. What they've done here is bloody criminal. Threaten me with my life. Have people abuse me. Slander me. We're going to have an investigation. I thank you to all those people that have watched this video. I'm now going to name names, those people that have been involved in the abuse and attacks against victims of Australia's deadliest medical scandal. They are the Haemophilia Foundation Australia and its president Gavin Finkelstein. He must be criminally investigated along with his organisation. They are the Hepatitis Australia, who've taken millions of dollars to discriminate against haemophiliacs. They actually, can you believe, wrote to the Senate in 2004 and told them that haemophiliacs should not be given financial assistance in Australia. And yet, haemophiliacs are principally infected by hepatitis C, a deadly virus. We've had so many die. And yet the body that collects taxpayer money, the Hepatitis Australia, Hepatitis New South Wales, wrote to the Senate that this Hepatitis Australia, Hepatitis New South Wales are supposed to represent the best interests of all people with hepatitis C. And no one's more affected by hepatitis C than members of the haemophilia community. And yet these organisations discriminated and lobbied against haemophiliacs getting financial assistance. That is criminal. They should have their funding completely removed. That's criminal. That's discrimination, the worst I've ever seen in my life. And we've had the media, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, for decades, dying friends of mine and people of our group have begged them, please would you investigate Australia's deadliest medical scandal, contaminated blood. And for decades they've denied us. And only a few years ago they'd agreed to interview victims and haemophiliacs, and at the last minute they pulled that interview. And the next thing you know, they were giving on-air statements about what a wonderful company CSL were. Okay, CSL were the one that provided the contaminated blood treatments to those haemophiliacs. I find that deeply suspicious, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. You are in so much trouble. You've taken billions of Australian dollars and you've helped cover up our nation's deadliest medical scandal. Your chief medical reporter, Sophie Scott, recently told one of our supporters that this scandal has been covered widely already in the Australian media. That is a barefaced lie. There she is. That's the quote. That is a barefaced lie. It's never once been investigated properly by the ABC's premier investigative program, Four Corners. They've denied us for years. They know it. I've had their producer in my own home 20 years ago. They asked me how many people were infected. I said thousands. Do you know what they did? Hung the phone. They basically came to my home. I never heard from them again. The ABC Four Corners. And now, 20 years later, I'm getting death threats and abuse. Okay, well, I just also want to say that the Hepatitis Australia and Hepatitis New South Wales used to come to our meetings and chastise relatives of infected blood victims, chastise for their parents for saying that their children were innocent victims. And Hepatitis Australia and Hepatitis New South Wales, receiving millions in government funds, said that that was discrimination against other people with viruses. How dare you? Did you know that the chair of the UK Infected Blood Inquiry called infected blood victims innocent victims? Had he been Australian, the judge of the inquiry, the chair of the inquiry, a former High Court British judge, he would have been accused of discrimination like I was and like all of our group was. We have been living in hell. We have lived in hell. And recently I shared a video about an American comedian called Alex Stein. Now, he may not be to everyone's taste, but the reason why I said I connected to him was that he lost his mother due to a terrible event, a medical negligence, it looks like, in an American hospital. And he said how he uses comedy, okay, because he lives in a living hell. Well, you'll know from watching my posts, some people might think I'm being insensitive. I'm not being. Sometimes I use comedy a lot. I try to use it, levity. Okay, and I do that because otherwise, oh man, what type of life would we have? We live this life every day. We've been abandoned every day for years. Death threats, abuse, slander, discrimination. You know, it's all bloody awful. How would you like to live with infected blood since you were a kid? Of all I've ever known, I was born into this. We've got superintendents who lost their career to this, nurses. We've got teachers. We've got university academics. We've got medical doctors. We've got carpenters, builders, regular people who've lived in silence for decades without help because of this. Okay? And a lovely friend of mine has just said, comedy is critical to sanity, and she's so right. And I want to end this on a peaceful, positive note. I've been very forceful and very passionate in this video. I thank you for your patience. So anyone watching, I'm sorry. I don't like making videos like this. Certainly don't like doing them live. My health is failing. I don't want any donations. I thank you. And supporters of our group are very generous. The reason I mention it is not for any violin. I've got wonderful friends and wonderful support, and I love them very dearly. Okay? The reason it is because probably it might be I'm running out of time. It's getting harder to breathe, harder to get my throat to work. And so, you know, after 30 years of campaigning, yeah, I wanted to be there for the whole way. I wanted to see it to its end. I hope to be able to. Thank you to all the supporters and followers of Infected Blood Australia. We've got such good support. We're being shadow banned. You know, as you know, anything we talk about and tape about Australia's deadliest medical scandal gets censored and shadow banned. But thank you for persevering with us. And thank you so much. You've become amazing friends. And we're going to have some meetings soon where we can all meet in person. I'd love to meet you while I still can. While I'm still able-bodied, you know, maybe that I go into the wheelchair and all that kind of thing. That's okay. If I live, though, it'd be good, because I'll never stop talking about this, and I'll never stop loving Australia or Australians. And actually, I have great admiration for the British infected campaigners, people like Tony Farrugia, my friend Chris. I've got great admiration. Thank you for all the efforts you've done over the decades. You've suffered immensely too, and we share a kinship that won't be broken. It really won't be. I want the very best for Australians with haemophiliacs. I think you know that. If you read my statement, there's been people saying that that's not true. Nah, it is true. It really is. Okay? It really is. That's the first thing I've got to say. And the reason is, it all started with a kid that went to my school, and he said that he had the chapter of his life ripped out. And when my mum told me that he died in 1989, he died, he's 16. And I said I'll get justice, and that's been my promise. I felt a little bit of survivor's guilt. Yeah, it's quite common, but yeah. So yeah, that's what it is. If that's what the only thing I could achieve, it would be a life worth living. Justice for Australian haemophiliacs. They were knowingly infected. Please. If haemophiliacs were helped in America decades ago, and they were helped all around the world decades ago, and it's because Australia corruptly had privatised the government agency, the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, in 1994. Did you know that their chair, Brian McNamee, I don't want to defame him or slander him because I know how it feels, Brian. I don't want to do that. I think I called you a scumbag in one of my videos. But that's not the best way, perhaps. Emotions run hot. But I just want you to help. You've made hundreds of millions of dollars out of blood. And we've had haemophiliacs, Aussie haemophiliacs, write to you, ask you to share some of the money, share some of your good fortune, because they're doing it real tough because of your product, mate. They've got AIDS and Hep C. And I just want us to finally turn the corner and finally get justice for what is Australia's deadliest medical scandal. That's been my modus operandi. I hope to be able to live the whole thing. Thank you, Saga Melky, for watching. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to meet you in person one day soon. Thank you for your patience, and thank you to the Infected Blood Inquiry for ever allowing me to be a witness. For the people involved with it, you've opened the door, the potential for victims of Australia's deadliest medical scandal, our infected blood scandal, to have justice. Because, trust me, if it weren't for you, we'd have been locked away and hidden in Australia. The Australian government are corrupt. Our health authorities are corrupted, and they were going to do nothing to help us. If you've been watching this video or joining us on this live, thank you so much. If you go to our bio, you can of course support our call for a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the tainted blood scandal, or you can click on the link in the message below if you're not watching on Instagram. And I thank you very much. My name is Charles Mackenzie, And to our supporters and our followers, I love you. I really do. Thank you.